I never thought my storage container business would become the center of a neighborhood war, but that was before I met Brenda Morrison and the Sunset Ridge HOA board. My name is Xander, and I have been running a portable storage container rental business in Phoenix, Arizona for the past 5 years. The concept was simple enough. People needed temporary storage during moves, renovations, or decluttering projects. I would deliver clean, secure 20-foot containers to their driveways. They would fill them at their own pace, and then I would either pick them up or transport them to their new location. It was honest work that paid the bills and helped people during stressful times in their lives. Everything changed when I bought my house in Sunset Ridge, a planned community on the outskirts of Phoenix. The neighborhood was nice enough, with desert landscaping, wide streets, and houses painted in various shades of beige and tan that supposedly complemented the Arizona landscape. I purchased a corner lot with extra space specifically because I needed somewhere to park my truck and occasionally stage a few containers between jobs. The house came with the usual HOA paperwork, which I skimmed through like most people do. There were rules about lawn maintenance, paint colors, and holiday decorations. Nothing in the documents I reviewed mentioned anything about home-based businesses or commercial vehicles. I even asked my real estate agent, who assured me that as long as I was not causing a disturbance, I should be fine. For the first 3 months, everything was perfect. I kept my work truck parked in my driveway, and when I had containers between rentals, I would keep 1 or 2 on the extra pad I had poured on the side of my property. The containers were clean, painted a neutral gray, and honestly looked better than some of the sun-faded sheds I saw in other yards. Then I got the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in a crisp white envelope with the Sunset Ridge HOA logo embossed in gold. I opened it while drinking my coffee, expecting maybe a reminder about the upcoming annual meeting or a notice about landscaping maintenance. Instead, I found a formal cease and desist notice informing me that my storage container business violated HOA covenants, codes, and restrictions. The letter stated that commercial vehicles were not permitted in driveways overnight, that storage containers constituted a commercial eyesore, and that I had 14 days to remove all business-related materials from my property or face daily fines of $200. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. I grabbed the HOA binder that had been handed to me at closing and started flipping through the pages. After an hour of searching, I found the relevant section buried in an amendment from 2 years ago, added after I had already signed my purchase agreement. The amendment prohibited any commercial activity visible from the street and banned commercial vehicles over a certain weight from overnight parking in driveways. The thing was, my truck was not over the weight limit they specified. I had the registration to prove it. And the container currently on my property was barely visible from the street because of the desert willow trees along my property line. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to discuss the matter like a reasonable adult. That was my first mistake. The meeting took place in the community center, a bland stucco building with the same beige paint scheme as everything else in the neighborhood. I arrived 15 minutes early and found about 20 other residents already seated in folding chairs arranged in neat rows. At the front of the room, a long table held the board members. Brenda Morrison sat in the center seat like a queen on her throne. She was probably in her mid-50s, with blonde hair that looked professionally colored and styled. She wore a crisp white blouse and a string of pearls that caught the fluorescent lights. Her expression was the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes, the type that said she enjoyed having power over others. To her left was Gerald Chen, the treasurer, a nervous-looking man who kept adjusting his glasses. On her right sat Patricia Drummond, the secretary, who appeared to be in her 70s and seemed more interested in her phone than the proceedings. I waited through 30 minutes of discussions about pool rules, complaints about someone's wind chimes, and a debate about whether the community should invest in new holiday decorations. Finally, during the open forum section, I raised my hand. Brenda acknowledged me with a slight nod. "Yes, you must be Isaac Xander. We have been expecting you to address your violation." I stood up, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Thank you. I wanted to discuss the letter I received about my business. I have reviewed the CCRs and I believe there has been a misunderstanding. My truck falls below the weight restrictions specified in the amendment, and the container currently on my property is not visible from the main street. I have been running my business without any complaints from neighbors." Brenda's smile widened, which somehow made her look less friendly. "Mr. Xander, the spirit of our community guidelines is clear. We maintain property values by ensuring Sunset Ridge remains a residential neighborhood, not a commercial zone. Your storage containers are industrial equipment, and several neighbors have expressed concerns." "Several neighbors?" I asked. "Could you tell me who complained? I would be happy to address their concerns directly." "The complaints were submitted anonymously through our website," Patricia chimed in, finally looking up from her phone. "We take all complaints seriously, regardless of whether residents feel comfortable identifying themselves." "But I have not violated any specific rule," I pressed. "My truck is within the weight limit, and my business operations do not create noise, traffic, or any other disturbance." Gerald cleared his throat nervously. "The board has interpreted the regulations to include any equipment associated with commercial activity. The containers themselves constitute a violation, regardless of their size or visibility." "That is a pretty broad interpretation," I said, feeling my frustration building. "That would technically include a landscaper's trailer or a plumber's van." Brenda leaned forward, her pearl necklace clinking against the table. "Mr. Xander, the board has made its decision. You have 14 days to comply or the fines will begin accruing. We are not here to debate our authority. This meeting is adjourned." I stood there, stunned, as people began filing out of the room. A few neighbors gave me sympathetic looks, but no one spoke up in my defense. Over the next 2 weeks, I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Maria Rodriguez, and she had a small practice in downtown Phoenix that focused on property law. "You have a case," she told me after reviewing my documents. "The amendment was added after your purchase, and their interpretation is overly broad. However, fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. Even if you win, you will likely spend thousands in legal fees and create significant stress in your life." "What are my options?" I asked. "You can comply and move your business operations off the property. You can fight it in court, which could take 6 months to a year. Or you can request a formal hearing with the board and try to negotiate a compromise." I chose the hearing option, hoping that reason would prevail if I could present my case more thoroughly. Another mistake. The formal hearing took place 3 weeks later in the same community center. This time, the room was set up more like a courtroom, with the board seated at an elevated table and a single chair facing them for me. About 15 residents sat in the audience section, and I recognized several of my immediate neighbors among them. I presented my case systematically. I showed photos of my property demonstrating that the container was not an eyesore. I provided testimony from my direct neighbors stating they had no issues with my business. I presented the weight specifications for my truck proving it fell within the acceptable limits. I even brought financial records showing that my business generated minimal traffic to the property. Brenda listened with that same cold smile, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she shuffled her papers and looked up. "Mr. Xander, your presentation is thorough, but it misses the fundamental point. This board has a responsibility to maintain the character and integrity of Sunset Ridge. When you purchased your home here, you agreed to abide by our rules and our interpretations of those rules. The fact that you disagree does not give you the right to ignore our authority." "I am not ignoring anything," I said, working hard to keep my voice level. "I am asking for a reasonable interpretation of rules that do not clearly prohibit what I am doing." "The rules are clear to us," Patricia added, "and we represent the community." "Do you though?" I asked. "Because none of my actual neighbors have complained. These anonymous complaints could be coming from anywhere, from anyone, or from no one at all." Brenda's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting this board is acting in bad faith, Mr. Xander?" "I am suggesting that decisions affecting homeowners should be based on actual community concerns, not arbitrary interpretations." Gerald shuffled his papers nervously. "The board has voted, Mr. Xander. The decision is final. You have 7 days remaining to comply before fines begin." I looked at the residents in attendance, hoping someone would speak up. A middle-aged man in the back who I recognized as Tom Whitfield, 3 houses down from me, raised his hand. "I live near Isaac, and I have never had a problem with his business," Tom said. "Seems like the board is overreaching here." "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield," Brenda said dismissively. "Your opinion is noted. However, the board makes decisions based on the overall community interest, not individual preferences." That night, I sat in my living room weighing my options. Fighting the HOA in court would cost at least $10,000, probably more. I would face daily fines during the legal battle. Even if I won, I would be living in a neighborhood where the board had it out for me, which meant more scrutiny and more battles in the future. But giving in felt like letting bullies win. My business was not hurting anyone. I had worked hard to build it, and moving operations would mean renting commercial space I could not afford, which would probably kill the business entirely. I decided to comply, but with my own interpretation. I moved the container off my property but parked it on the street directly in front of my house. The CCRs said nothing about public streets. I continued parking my truck in my driveway because it met the weight requirements. 3 days later, I got another letter. This one informed me that parking commercial equipment on public streets violated city ordinances, and the HOA had reported me to code enforcement. The letter also stated that my truck, while technically within weight limits, still constituted a commercial vehicle due to my business logo on the door, which violated the spirit of the regulations. They wanted me to remove my business logo. The logo I had spent $500 to have professionally designed and painted on both doors of my truck. I called Maria again. "They are reaching," she said, "but they are not technically wrong. Many municipalities have restrictions on commercial vehicles parked on residential streets overnight, and if your truck has commercial signage, they can argue it is advertising which might be prohibited. So what do I do? Honestly, Isaac, you find somewhere else to live. These people are not going to stop. Some HOA boards become fixated on a particular homeowner and it becomes a vendetta. You will fight this battle and win, then they will find something else. Your grass will be a 1/4 inch too tall. Your paint will be the wrong shade. It never ends." "That is insane," "Welcome to HOA law," she said. "I see this all the time. The system gives too much power to people who often have too much time on their hands and not enough actual problems in their lives. I refuse to give up that easily." I removed the magnetic signs with my logo from my truck doors and moved all my containers to a small storage yard I rented on the other side of town. It cost me $800 a month, which significantly cut into my profits, but I figured it was temporary until I could sort things out or move. For 2 months, there was peace. I got no letters, no fines. I started to think maybe Brenda and her board had moved on to tormenting someone else. Then, in early November, everything changed. I was finishing up a delivery job for a client in Scottsdale when my phone rang. It was Tom Whitfield, my neighbor who had spoken up at the hearing. "Isaac, you need to get back to the neighborhood right now," he said, his voice urgent. "What is going on? Just get here. You are going to want to see this." I drove back to Sunset Ridge with a sense of dread. As I turned onto my street, I immediately saw what Tom meant. The community center parking lot was completely full of vehicles, and dozens of residents were standing around in small groups, many gesturing animatedly. I parked and walked over to where Tom stood with his wife, Jennifer. "What happened?" I asked. "Total disaster," Jennifer said. The HOA hired Prestige Moving and Storage to handle the community's holiday decoration installation and storage. They had all our stuff, all the community decorations, everything stored in their warehouse. "Okay, so Prestige went bankrupt," Tom continued. "Just shut down overnight. Filed for bankruptcy protection, locked up their warehouses, and disappeared. Everyone who had stuff stored with them is locked out until the bankruptcy court figures out what to do with the inventory." "That is terrible, but what does it have to do with the situation right now?" Tom pointed toward the community center, where Brenda Morrison was standing on the steps, clearly in the middle of addressing a crowd of angry residents. The HOA had everything stored with them. All the holiday decorations that people pay for through their HOA fees. The community center furniture that was being refinished, documents and records, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff, all locked away with no access. I felt a grim satisfaction wash over me. "That is unfortunate for them." Jennifer looked at me seriously. "It gets worse for the board." Apparently, Brenda convinced everyone to use Prestige because they gave the HOA a special deal. But several residents are saying that Brenda's nephew works for Prestige, and they think she got a kickback for directing all that business their way. Now that was interesting. I walked closer to hear Brenda addressing the crowd. Her composed demeanor had cracks showing through. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she kept wringing her hands. "I understand everyone is frustrated," she was saying, "but we had no way of knowing that Prestige would go bankrupt. They were a reputable company with good reviews. My grandmother's furniture was in their storage," a younger woman shouted from the crowd. "Stuff I can't replace, and you picked them because of your nephew." "That is a baseless accusation," Brenda snapped. "My nephew happened to work there, but that had nothing to do with our decision." "Then why did you not disclose the conflict of interest?" Another voice called out. "There was no conflict because there was no benefit to me personally," Brenda said, but her voice lacked conviction. I watched the scene unfold with a mixture of sympathy for the residents who had lost access to their belongings and absolutely none for Brenda. This was karma in action. The meeting eventually broke up with no resolution. Residents would have to wait for the bankruptcy proceedings to play out, which could take months. The community would have no holiday decorations this year, which in a neighborhood that prided itself on its elaborate seasonal displays was a huge blow. I went home thinking that was the end of the drama. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a phone call from Gerald Chen, the HOA treasurer. "Isaac, this is Gerald from the HOA board. I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." "That depends on why you are calling," I said cautiously. "I wanted to discuss a potential business arrangement. The board is in a difficult situation with the Prestige bankruptcy, and we need temporary storage solutions for community property and potentially for residents affected by the situation." I almost laughed. "You are calling to ask about storage containers. The same storage containers you find me for having on my property." "I understand the irony," Gerald said, sounding genuinely uncomfortable. "But we are in a bind. You run a legitimate storage business and we need your services." "This would be a paid contract. Does Brenda know you are calling me?" There was a long pause. "Not yet. I wanted to see if you were even interested before presenting it to the full board." "Let me think about it," I said, and ended the call. Part of me wanted to tell them to go to hell. They had made my life difficult for months, cost me money, and treated me like I was running a criminal enterprise. But another part of me saw an opportunity. If the HOA hired me officially, it would be a tacit admission that my business was legitimate and necessary. I called Maria for advice. "Take the job," she said immediately. "But get everything in writing. Make them sign a contract that includes a clause stating they acknowledge your business as legitimate and agree not to interfere with your operations going forward." "Will they agree to that?" "They are desperate." "Use that leverage. Also, charge them premium rates." I spent the next day drafting a proposal with Maria's help. I would provide up to 10 storage containers for a period of 6 months with an option to extend. The containers would be placed in the community center parking lot, which was HOA property, and therefore not subject to residential restrictions. The contract included the clause acknowledging my business legitimacy, and a provision that the HOA would not take any action against my home-based operations for the duration of the contract, and 1 year beyond. The price I quoted was 30% higher than my usual commercial rate. I emailed the proposal to Gerald that evening. He called me the next morning. "The board met last night in emergency session," he said. "We are prepared to accept your terms, but Brenda wants to negotiate the price down." "The price is not negotiable," I said firmly. "You burned that bridge when you tried to shut down my business. These are my terms. Take them or find someone else." Another long pause. "I will call you back." 3 hours later, my phone rang again. It was Gerald. "We accept," he said. "Can you have the first containers delivered by this weekend? We have residents who need immediate storage solutions. I will have a contract drawn up today. Once it is signed and I receive the first month's payment, I can deliver on Saturday." Agreed. I called Maria, who expedited the contract preparation. By Friday afternoon, I had a signed agreement and a check for $12,000, representing the first month's rental for 10 containers plus delivery and setup fees. Saturday morning, I arrived at the community center with my truck and the first load of containers. A crowd of residents had gathered, including several people I recognized from the meetings. The irony was not lost on anyone. Here I was, the guy they had tried to ban from the neighborhood, now providing the solution to their crisis. I was positioning the second container when Brenda appeared. She looked like she had aged 5 years in the past week. The polished, imperious woman who had sat in judgment of me at those meetings was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and stressed. "Mr. Xander," she said stiffly, "I want to be clear that this arrangement does not change the board's position on residential operations." I straightened up and looked at her directly. "Actually, Mrs. Morrison, it does. Read the contract you signed. Section 7, paragraph 3. The board acknowledges my business as legitimate and agrees to cease all interference with my operations. Your signature is on that document." Her face flushed red. Gerald did not have authority to agree to those terms. He had authority to sign on behalf of the board, and he did. If you want to challenge the contract, that is your choice. But the moment you do, these containers go away, and you can explain to your neighbors why they are losing their storage, because you are more interested in a personal vendetta than in helping the community. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She turned and walked away without another word. Over the next few days, I delivered the remaining containers. Residents began using them to store items they had managed to retrieve from other storage situations or things they needed to protect while dealing with the Prestige bankruptcy aftermath. Several people approached me directly to thank me and to apologize for not speaking up sooner about the board's treatment of me. Tom Whitfield pulled me aside on Monday morning as I was checking on the containers. "You handled that with more class than I would have," he said. "Brenda has been making people's lives miserable for years. Maybe this will knock her down a peg." "Has she always been like this?" I asked. "Pretty much. She moved into the neighborhood about 7 years ago, immediately joined the HOA board, and has been on a power trip ever since. She has forced out 3 other board members who disagreed with her, and now she basically runs everything. Gerald and Patricia just go along with whatever she wants." "Why do people keep voting for her?" Tom shrugged. "Most people do not pay attention to HOA elections. They sign the proxy form giving their vote to whoever, and Brenda collects those proxies. Plus, a lot of residents just do not want the hassle of being on the board themselves, so they let her do it." That evening, I was at home catching up on paperwork when I got an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." I opened it cautiously, half expecting spam. Instead, I found a message from someone who identified themselves only as a concerned resident. The email contained a detailed breakdown of HOA finances, specifically related to the Prestige moving and storage contract. According to the documents attached, Brenda had not just recommended Prestige because her nephew worked there. She had received a $5,000 consulting fee from Prestige for bringing them the HOA's business. The payment had been made to a company called Morrison Consulting LLC, which was registered to Brenda. This was not just a conflict of interest. This was self-dealing, which was almost certainly a breach of her fiduciary duty to the HOA. Depending on how Arizona law treated HOA boards, it might even be illegal. I saved all the documents and forwarded them to Maria. She called me first thing Tuesday morning. "Where did you get these?" Anonymous email from someone in the neighborhood. "This is serious, Isaac. If these documents are legitimate, Brenda violated her fiduciary duty to the HOA. The board could sue her personally to recover the money, and depending on how the state attorney general's office views it, there could be criminal implications. What should I do with this information?" "Nothing yet. Let me verify the documents are real and not forged. If they are legitimate, we need to report this through proper channels. This is not something you want to get wrong." Over the next week, Maria worked with a forensic accountant to verify the documents. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had become increasingly aware of the Prestige situation and Brenda's potential involvement. Someone had apparently leaked information because I started hearing whispers and seeing small groups of residents having intense conversations. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, and I decided to attend. The community center was packed, with every seat filled and people standing along the walls. The energy in the room was completely different from previous meetings. Instead of the usual board compliance, There was anger and anticipation. Brenda called the meeting to order, but she barely got through the opening statements before hands shot up all over the room. "We want to discuss the Prestige situation," called out a woman I recognized as living 2 streets over. "Specifically, we want to know about your relationship with the company." "I have already addressed this," Brenda said, her voice sharp. "My nephew worked there, but I had no financial interest in the company." "That is not what we heard," Tom Whitfield said, standing up. "We have information that you received $5,000 from Prestige for directing business to them." The room erupted in shouting. Brenda banged her gavel on the table, but it took several minutes for order to be restored. "Those are false accusations," Brenda said, but her voice wavered. "I do not know who is spreading these lies, but I will not tolerate this kind of harassment." "Then you will not mind showing us the financial records for Morrison Consulting LLC," another resident called out. "If you have nothing to hide, prove it." Gerald and Patricia both looked extremely uncomfortable. Gerald kept adjusting his glasses nervously, while Patricia seemed to be trying to disappear into her chair. "I do not have to prove anything to you," Brenda snapped. "This board operates under proper oversight and accountability. These meetings are not a forum for unfounded accusations." "Then we call for a vote of no confidence," Tom said. "As a homeowner in good standing, I formally move that the board be dissolved and new elections be held immediately." The room erupted in applause and shouts of support. Brenda looked panicked. "That is not how this works," she said. "There are procedures that must be followed." "Actually, Mrs. Morrison," I said, standing up, "according to the HOA bylaws, which I have read very carefully over the past few months, any homeowner can call for a special election with the support of 10% of the residents." "How many people are in this room right now?" I looked around, counting quickly. There were at least 70 people present. Sunset Ridge had about 400 homes, which meant we only needed 40 signatures to trigger a special election. "Who supports holding a special election to replace the current board?" I called out. Nearly every hand in the room went up. The message was clear. Brenda's face had gone pale. She looked at Gerald and Patricia, but both of them were avoiding eye contact. "This meeting is adjourned," she said abruptly, grabbing her papers and standing up. "You cannot just adjourn when you do not like what is happening," someone shouted. But Brenda was already walking out of the community center. Patricia followed her quickly, but Gerald remained seated, looking miserable. After Brenda left, several residents approached Gerald. "We need answers," Tom said. "What did you know about the Prestige deal?" Gerald removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I knew about the family connection, but I did not know about any payment. Brenda presented Prestige as the best option, showed us quotes from other companies, and their price was better. I trusted her judgment. That was my mistake." "Did you vote to approve the contract?" I asked. "We all did." But Brenda handled all the details. She said she would negotiate the final terms, and we approved it based on her recommendation. "So she could have taken that payment without you knowing," Tom said. "Apparently so," Gerald admitted. "Look, I never wanted to be on this board. I took the position because no one else would, and someone had to do it. But if Brenda has been using her position to enrich herself, I want nothing to do with it. I will resign effective immediately." "Do not resign yet," I said. "We need you to help make sure proper procedures are followed. But we also need full transparency on all HOA finances and contracts." Gerald nodded slowly. "I can do that. I will prepare a full financial report for the community." Over the next 3 days, Gerald worked with the HOA's accountant to compile a comprehensive financial review. What he found was disturbing. The Prestige payment was not the only questionable transaction. Brenda had directed business to several companies over the past 2 years, and in most cases, those companies had made payments to Morrison Consulting LLC. A landscaping company had paid her $3,000. A pool maintenance contractor had paid $2,000. An architectural review consultant had paid $1,500. In total, Brenda had received over $15,000 in undisclosed payments from companies doing business with the HOA. Gerald presented these findings at a special meeting he called for Monday evening. This time, even more residents attended and the mood was angry. "I had no idea this was happening," Gerald said, his voice shaking. "I have been a negligent treasurer, and for that I apologize. But I want to be clear that I personally received no benefits from these arrangements, and neither did Patricia as far as I can tell." "Where is Brenda?" someone asked. "She has not responded to any of my calls or emails," Gerald said. "I drove by her house and her car is gone. I think she may have left town. We need to report this to the police," a man in the front row said. "This is fraud." "It is at minimum a civil matter," I said, standing up. "She violated her fiduciary duty to the HOA. But given the amounts involved and the pattern of behavior, it might also be criminal." "Isaac is right," Tom added. "We need to contact the authorities and let them investigate properly." The group voted unanimously to authorize Gerald to report the matter to the Phoenix Police Department and to the Arizona Attorney General's office. They also voted to immediately suspend Brenda from the board and to hold elections for all 3 board positions within 30 days. I went home that night feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I had not set out to destroy Brenda Morrison or the HOA board. I just wanted to run my business and live in peace. But their overreach had led to this entire situation unfolding. The next morning, I got a call from Detective Sarah Kowalski with the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. "Mr. Xander, I understand you have been involved in the situation with the Sunset Ridge HOA board. I would like to get a statement from you about your experiences with Mrs. Morrison." I spent 2 hours at the police station giving a detailed account of everything that had happened, from the initial cease and desist letter through the contract I had signed with the HOA. I provided copies of all the documents I had, including the anonymous email with the financial information. "Where did this email come from?" Detective Kowalski asked. "I honestly do not know. It came from an anonymous sender. I forwarded it to my attorney, who had it verified by a forensic accountant." "You did not try to trace the sender?" "No. I figured if someone was willing to come forward, they would do it directly. I was not going to play detective." She made notes on her pad. "We will be investigating this thoroughly. HOA board fraud is more common than people realize, and when board members use their position for personal enrichment, it is taken seriously. What happens now? We will interview other board members, review all financial records, and try to locate Mrs. Morrison. If the evidence supports criminal charges, we will pursue them. This could take several months to resolve fully." I left the police station feeling like a weight had been lifted. This was no longer my problem to solve. The proper authorities were involved, and justice would run its course. The HOA elections were held 3 weeks later. Tom Whitfield ran for president and won overwhelmingly. A woman named Rachel Stevens, who worked as a corporate attorney, was elected vice president. A retired accountant named David Park became treasurer. All 3 ran on a platform of transparency, accountability, and common sense governance. One of their first actions was to formally rescind all violations and fines issued to me. They also sent a letter to every homeowner apologizing for the previous board's overreach and promising a new approach. Tom called me a few days after taking office. "We want to talk about your business operations. Can you come to a meeting?" I felt a familiar sense of dread. "What about them? Just come to the meeting. This is a good conversation, I promise." I showed up at the community center the next evening to find Tom, Rachel, and David waiting with coffee and pastries. "Okay, what is going on?" I asked. Rachel pulled out a folder. "We have been reviewing the HOA's stance on home-based businesses, and we think the previous board was completely out of line. Your business does not create any nuisance or impact property values. In fact, having local services available is a benefit to the community. We want to amend the CCRs to specifically allow home-based businesses that meet certain reasonable criteria," Tom added. "No excessive noise, no hazardous materials, no significant increase in traffic, things like that. Your storage container business would clearly qualify. We also want to hire you permanently as the HOA's preferred storage provider," David said. "We still have 8 months on your current contract, but we would like to extend it indefinitely at a fair rate." I sat back, processing this information. "I appreciate this, but I am not looking for charity or special treatment because of what happened." "This is not charity," Rachel said firmly. "This is good business. You provide excellent service, your rates are fair, and you are local. Why would we hire someone from across town when we have exactly what we need right here in the neighborhood? Plus," Tom added with a grin, "it will drive Brenda crazy when she finds out we are not only allowing your business but actively supporting it." "Have they found her?" I asked. "Not yet," David said. "But the police have frozen her bank accounts, and apparently she did not get very far. Detective Kowalski thinks they will locate her within the next few weeks." Over the next month, life in Sunset Ridge slowly returned to normal. The bankruptcy court finally allowed access to the Prestige warehouse, and residents began retrieving their belongings. Some items were damaged or missing, which led to a class action lawsuit against Prestige's bonding company, but at least people got most of their things back. I continued providing storage containers for various residents and maintained my contract with the HOA. My business actually grew because several residents recommended me to friends in other neighborhoods. The exposure from the whole situation, while stressful, had actually been good for business. 6 weeks after the financial crimes investigation began, Detective Kowalski called me. "We found Brenda Morrison," she said. "She was staying with her sister in Tucson. We arrested her yesterday and charged her with theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The Attorney General's office is also pursuing civil charges to recover the money she took." "How much trouble is she in?" I asked. "Significant trouble. Between the criminal charges and the civil liability, she is looking at possible jail time and definitely substantial financial penalties. She would have been better off cooperating from the start, but she tried to run, which made everything worse." "What about the HOA? Will they get their money back?" "That depends on what assets she has. We have identified several bank accounts and some property that could be liquidated. The HOA will be able to file a claim as part of the criminal restitution and the civil proceedings. They will probably recover at least some of the money, though it might take time." I thanked Detective Kowalski for the update and sat in my office thinking about how dramatically everything had changed. 4 months ago, I was fighting just to keep my business running and my home. Now, I had a thriving business, good relationships with my neighbors, and a reformed HOA that actually functioned properly. The preliminary hearing for Brenda's criminal case was scheduled for late January. I was not required to attend, but Tom convinced several of us to show up as a show of community support for accountability. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix was busy that morning. We found seats in the gallery and waited for the proceedings to begin. When Brenda was led into the courtroom, I barely recognized her. The polished, imperious woman was gone. She looked defeated, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual designer clothes. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea and requested reasonable bail. The prosecutor argued that Brenda was a flight risk given her previous attempt to evade arrest. The judge agreed and set bail at $50,000, which Brenda apparently could not make because she remained in custody. As we left the courthouse, Tom shook his head. "I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. She made her choices," Rachel said. "She had power and authority and she abused both. Actions have consequences." "What happens to the HOA now?" I asked. "We move forward," David said. "We have already started implementing new financial controls. Every contract over $1,000 now requires approval from at least 2 board members. We are publishing monthly financial reports, and we are encouraging more homeowner participation in governance. We are also working on revising the CCRs to be more reasonable," Tom added. "A lot of the restrictions were put in place by previous boards, including Brenda's, and they are unnecessarily restrictive. We want this to be a community, not a prison." Over the following months, the changes became more apparent. The HOA began hosting community events like food truck nights and outdoor movie screenings. The oppressive atmosphere of constant surveillance and nitpicking violations disappeared. People seemed happier and more engaged with their neighbors. My storage container business continued to grow. I hired 2 employees to help with deliveries and customer service. I bought 3 more containers to meet demand. I even started getting contracts from other HOAs in the area. Ironically enough, in March, Tom called me with news. Brenda took a plea deal. She is pleading guilty to theft and fraud charges. She will serve 18 months in county jail, pay full restitution to the HOA, and she is permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. 18 months seems light, I said. The prosecutor said it was a reasonable deal given that this was her first offense and she is cooperating to help recover the money. Plus, the civil penalties will probably bankrupt her. She is losing her house, her retirement accounts, everything. Did she say why she did it? According to her attorney, she started with small consulting fees that seemed legitimate. Then it escalated. She convinced herself she deserved the money because of all the work she was doing for the community. Classic rationalization. "I guess everyone is the hero of their own story," I said. "The important thing is that it is over. We can finally move forward without this hanging over the neighborhood." The HOA's lawsuit to recover funds was settled in April. Brenda's assets, including her house and investment accounts, were liquidated. After legal fees and expenses, the HOA recovered about $73,000 of the $125,000 that had been lost in the Prestige bankruptcy and Brenda's schemes. It was not everything, but it was something. With the recovered funds and better financial management, the new board was able to reduce HOA fees by 15% for the following year, which made them very popular with residents. In May, the community held its annual meeting, the first under the new board's leadership. Instead of the tense, adversarial atmosphere of previous years, the meeting felt almost festive. People were laughing and chatting. The board presented a transparent financial report and outlined plans for community improvements. During the open forum section, a newer resident I did not know stood up. "I moved here 3 months ago, and I just want to say this is the best HOA experience I have ever had. You actually listen to residents, you are transparent about decisions, and you treat us like adults. Thank you." The room broke into applause. Tom looked genuinely emotional. "That is what we are trying to build here," he said. "A community where people want to live, not where they feel trapped by arbitrary rules and power-hungry board members." After the meeting, several people came up to thank me specifically for standing up to Brenda and for helping expose the financial mismanagement. "You could have just moved away and let someone else deal with it," one woman said, "but you stayed and fought. That took courage." I appreciated the sentiment, but honestly, I had not felt particularly courageous during most of it. I had felt frustrated, angry, and often powerless. I had considered giving up multiple times, but something about the injustice of the situation had kept me going. By summer, Sunset Ridge felt like a completely different neighborhood. The constant fear of violation notices and arbitrary fines was gone. People were actually improving their properties, adding creative landscaping and personal touches, because they no longer worried about the HOA coming after them for minor deviations. My business continued to thrive. I expanded to include portable office containers and even climate-controlled units for clients who needed them. I bought a second truck and hired 2 more employees. The business I had almost lost because of HOA overreach had actually grown stronger because of it. In July, I got an unexpected call from a producer at a local news station. They wanted to do a story about HOA reform and had heard about the Sunset Ridge situation. "This is a story people need to hear," the producer told me. "HOA abuse is a real problem in Arizona and across the country. Your situation shows how bad it can get, but also how communities can fix it." I agreed to the interview, as did Tom and several other residents. The story aired during the evening news in August and generated significant response. The station received hundreds of emails and calls from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. The attention led to something unexpected. A state representative named James Martinez reached out to me. "I have been trying to push HOA reform legislation for 2 years," he told me over coffee at a cafe near the Capitol. "But it is hard to get traction because most people do not understand how serious the problem is. Would you be willing to testify at a committee hearing about your experience?" Me. "I am just a guy who runs a storage business." "Exactly. You are not a lawyer or a professional activist. You are a regular homeowner who got caught in a broken system. Your story resonates with people." I agreed, and in September, I found myself in a committee room at the Arizona State Capitol, testifying before a group of legislators about my experiences with the Sunset Ridge HOA. I kept my testimony factual and focused on the structural problems that allowed abuse. I talked about how HOA boards often operate with minimal oversight. I discussed how the amendment process can change rules after homeowners have already purchased their properties. I explained how the cost of fighting an HOA in court is prohibitive for most homeowners, which gives boards enormous unchecked power. The committee asked thoughtful questions, and several legislators shared similar stories from their own constituents. Representative Martinez thanked me for my testimony and told me he was optimistic that reform legislation would finally move forward. By October, life had settled into a comfortable routine. My business was stable and growing. The HOA operated smoothly under Tom's leadership. The neighborhood felt like an actual community rather than a battleground. I was doing paperwork in my home office one evening when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Brenda Morrison standing on my porch. I was so surprised I could not speak for a moment. She looked different, thinner and older, wearing simple clothes and no jewelry. "I know I am probably the last person you want to see," she said quietly, "but I am out on work release, and I wanted to apologize in person before I finish my sentence. How did you get work release? I asked, still processing that she was actually standing in front of me. Good behavior, compliance with restitution payments, and the jail is overcrowded. I am working at a retail store and living in a halfway house. I will be on probation for 3 years after I complete my sentence. I did not invite her in, but I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Why are you here, Brenda? I spent a lot of time thinking about what I did and why I did it, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing for the community. That people like you, who did not follow my vision for what the neighborhood should be, were the problem. I was wrong. Yes, you were. I let power go to my head. I started seeing residents as subjects rather than neighbors. And when I started taking money, I rationalized it as compensation for my time and expertise. But I knew it was wrong. I just did not want to admit it. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserved better. Everyone in Sunset Ridge deserved better. I abused my position, and you bore the brunt of it because you had the nerve to stand up to me. I am sorry. I looked at her for a long moment. Part of me was still angry about everything she had put me through. But mostly, I just felt tired of the whole situation. I appreciate the apology, I said finally. I hope you learn from this and do better in the future. I will never serve on an HOA board again, that is certain, she said with a bitter laugh. It is actually part of my plea agreement. But even if it was not, I would never want that kind of power again. It brought out the worst in me. She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. For what it is worth, your business is good. You provide a valuable service, and I should have recognized that, instead of seeing it as a threat to my authority. I hope you continue to be successful. Thank you, I said, not sure what else to say. I watched her walk back to an older sedan parked on the street and drive away. I went inside and sat in my living room for a while, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. In November, Representative Martinez's HOA reform bill passed through committee and was scheduled for a full vote in the legislative session. The bill included provisions requiring greater financial transparency, limiting the amount of fines HOAs could impose, and creating an easier process for homeowners to challenge board decisions. Tom and I attended the vote, sitting in the gallery as legislators debated the merits of the bill. It was not a perfect solution to all HOA problems, but it was a step in the right direction. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law by the governor in December. We did something that matters, Tom said as we left the Capitol building. Other homeowners will have better protections because of what happened to you. It should not have taken someone abusing their power for these reforms to happen, I said, but I am glad something good came from it. As the year came to a close, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. 12 months earlier, I had been fighting for my business survival and considering moving out of my house to escape an oppressive HOA. Now, I had a thriving business, good relationships with my neighbors, and had even played a small role in legislative reform. The holiday season in Sunset Ridge was particularly festive that year. With proper planning and no fraud, the HOA was able to purchase new community decorations. The neighborhood looked beautiful, with lights and displays throughout the community. On Christmas Eve, Tom organized a neighborhood party in the community center. Someone had the idea to use one of my storage containers as a giant gift box decoration, which made me laugh. The same containers that had been deemed eyesores and violations were now part of the community celebration. As I stood in the decorated community center, drinking cider and chatting with neighbors who had become friends, I realized that the entire experience, as difficult as it had been, had taught me something important. Standing up to injustice matters. Fighting for what is right matters. And communities work best when people treat each other with respect and fairness rather than wielding power over others. In January, I received a letter from the HOA. For a moment, I felt that familiar dread, conditioned by months of threatening letters from Brenda's board. But this letter was different. It was a formal thank you from the new board, acknowledging my role in exposing financial mismanagement and helping to reform the community's governance. They also informed me that they were naming the community storage area, where my containers were permanently stationed, as Xander Plaza in recognition of my service to Sunset Ridge. I called Tom. "You did not have to do this. We wanted to," he said. "You stood up when it mattered, and you helped make this a better place to live. That deserves recognition." A small ceremony was held in February to dedicate the newly named area. It was modest, just a plaque and some landscaping, but it meant more to me than any business award or recognition ever could. It represented a community that had gone through a difficult period and come out stronger. My business continued to grow throughout the spring. I opened a small office outside my home to handle the administrative side, which allowed me to keep my house as my actual home rather than a constant workplace. I hired a manager to handle day-to-day operations, which gave me more time to focus on strategy and growth. In March, I got an unexpected call from Gerald Chen, the former treasurer who had helped expose Brenda's financial crimes. "Isaac, I wanted to let you know that I am moving out of state for a new job. But before I go, I wanted to thank you for pushing us to do the right thing. I should have been more vigilant as treasurer. I let Brenda dominate the board because it was easier than standing up to her. Watching you fight for what was right taught me that sometimes the hard path is the necessary path." "I appreciate that, Gerald. Good luck with the new job." "One more thing," he said. "I have been documenting everything that happened, all the lessons learned about HOA governance and financial oversight. I am turning it into a handbook for HOA board members. Would you be willing to write a foreword from a homeowner's perspective?" "I would be honored," I said. Gerald's handbook was published by a small press in June and actually sold reasonably well. It became something of a resource in HOA reform circles, a practical guide to avoiding the mistakes that had plagued Sunset Ridge. In August, exactly 2 years after I had first received that threatening letter from Brenda, I was invited to speak at a national HOA reform conference in Denver. Standing at a podium in front of hundreds of homeowners, board members, and property managers, I told the story of my experience. "The problem with HOAs is not the concept itself," I said. "Communities need some level of organization and shared standards. The problem is when boards forget they are servants of the community, not rulers of it. When board members start seeing their neighbors as subjects to be controlled rather than fellow residents with rights and dignity, that is when things go wrong." The speech was well received, and afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories of HOA overreach and abuse. Some were heartbreaking, stories of elderly homeowners losing their houses over unpaid fines for minor violations, or families driven to bankruptcy fighting unjust HOA actions. But there were also hopeful stories, communities that had reformed their governance after experiencing problems. Board members who genuinely tried to serve their neighbors rather than control them. Homeowners who had successfully challenged unjust rules and made their communities better places to live. Flying home from Denver, I realized that my small fight in one Phoenix neighborhood had become part of a larger movement toward HOA accountability and reform. It was not something I had sought or planned, but it felt meaningful. Back in Sunset Ridge, life continued to improve. The community was thriving under the new board's leadership. Property values were actually increasing, which put to rest Brenda's argument that my business would harm the neighborhood. In fact, several real estate agents told Tom that Sunset Ridge had developed a reputation as a well-managed community, which made homes more desirable. In September, I hired my 10th employee and bought my 20th storage container. The business that had almost been destroyed by an overreaching HOA was now one of the largest portable storage providers in the Phoenix area. One evening in October, I was having dinner with Tom and his wife Jennifer when the conversation turned to reflection on everything that had happened. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had just given up and moved away?" Jennifer asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "My life would probably be simpler in some ways, but I would have always wondered if I should have fought harder." And Brenda would still be running the HOA, probably making other people's lives miserable. "The neighborhood owes you a debt," Tom said. "You stood up when no one else would." "Other people stood up too," I said. "You spoke up at that first meeting when you did not have to." Gerald eventually did the right thing. That anonymous person who sent me the financial documents. Change does not happen because of one person. It happens when enough people decide something is wrong and needs to be fixed. As fall turned to winter, I found myself feeling genuinely content with my life. My business was successful. My home was in a community that actually felt like a community. I had been part of something that made a positive difference, not just for me but for my neighbors and potentially for homeowners dealing with similar situations across the country. The final chapter of the Brenda Morrison saga came in November. She completed her jail sentence and probation requirements. As part of her restitution agreement, she had paid back every dollar she had taken from the HOA and from residents. She had lost her house, her retirement savings, and her reputation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to New Mexico to live with family and was working as a bookkeeper for a small business. I hoped she had truly learned from her mistakes and was building a better life. Representative Martinez's reform legislation had been in effect for a year, and early reports suggested it was having a positive impact. The number of complaints filed with the state about HOA overreach had decreased, and several communities had used the new provisions to challenge unreasonable board actions. In December, as Sunset Ridge prepared for its second holiday season under reformed leadership, I stood in my driveway looking at my house. It was not a mansion, just a modest single-story home in a planned community in Phoenix. But it was mine, and I had fought to keep the right to live here on reasonable terms. My storage containers, the same ones that had been called eyesores and violations, sat in their dedicated area at the community center, serving neighbors who needed them. My truck, with its business logo proudly displayed, was parked in my driveway where it belonged. The fight with the Sunset Ridge HOA had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times demoralizing. But it had also taught me the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. It had shown me that communities work best when governed by principles of fairness, transparency, and respect, rather than power and control. As I went inside my house that evening, I thought about writing advice I might give to other homeowners facing similar situations. Stand your ground when you are in the right. Document everything. Seek legal counsel when needed. Build alliances with reasonable neighbors. Do not let bullies win through intimidation. And remember that HOA boards work for the homeowners, not the other way around. The storage container business that Brenda Morrison had tried to ban was now thriving. The community that had been oppressed by her abuse of power was now flourishing, and the homeowners who had felt powerless were now engaged and empowered. Sometimes justice takes time, but when people stand together for what is right, positive change is possible. That was the lesson of Sunset Ridge, and it was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life.